Welcome to the Bold Claims Podcast with your hosts, Matt Danskin, Daniel Robosky, and Taylor Ammons.
Welcome to the Bold Claims Podcast, brought to you by Building Experts Institute. I'm Matt Danskin. In today's episode, we're going to talk about roof rejuvenation, and we're also going to discuss the trend from RCV to ACV policies that we're seeing across the country. Join me and our other experts as we dive into these topics. Let's get started. So with the roof rejuvenation stuff, I know a little bit about it, but I haven't really taken time to dig into it. Mm-hmm. There's what I understand, like soybean oil or something akin to that. And there is the nano.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Go
Nano. But I don't know if that's it or if there's other things or what all the differences are. What did you find when you were kind of getting into all that stuff?
Yeah, I deferred a lot to Bubba on that because I knew the type of research he was doing when he was looking into some of those different companies. I know like Roof Max, to my understanding, has more of a proprietary type chemical that they're using, but it is typically like an oil based that goes on, and the entire premise is to do that low pressure, like more of a soft wash to remove any of those dark black streaks from the blue algae that begins to grow on there to help extend the life of the roof. But I know on some of the ones we've done, once you put that like actual rejuvenation coating down, that roof gets slick.
Oh, really?
Real slick.
I was
actually like surprised at how slippery it was, because cougar paws, we were on about a 612, and cougars, I mean, you were just sliding.
Oh, jeez.
So it's
does that go away after a little while, do you think? Or?
Yes, yeah, because I mean, when we had went back and checked everything out, but it was just fine. But there's a handful of different products out on the market right now, and the actual rejuvenation chemical, if you'll call it that, is typically your non-toxics. They're not going to harm the environment or anything like that. But the main issue that I've seen is when it gets to the actual cleaning, because it's a two-step process.
Okay.
So the roof gets cleaned first and then gets rejuvenated. So, a lot of the people that are offering roof washes are not actually doing a step 2 of the rejuvenation.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so it has to be both. And so I'm not super familiar with like the Go Nano, but I would imagine that, you need to clean the material and then apply that coating.
Sure.
But, I know, ours in particular can be done on a brand spanking new roof as well. And so I think there's some benefits to that. Or if you did like a Go Nano on a brand new shingle, there was a demo at RoofCon, and I was pretty impressed with the Go Nano on the hail cannon.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately going through and getting the roof cleaned first to remove the streaking, and then doing the rejuvenation aspect on the back end, that tends to be where it gets more expensive, because you're having to two-step it. But,
right.
That cleaning is typically being done with a super strong like sodium hydrochloride solution, which is ultimately bleach.
You have to watch out for the plants.
Yeah,
and all
so
that
you've got to make
stuff.
sure your landscaping is either covered or it's being saturated with water the whole time. There's a lot of water consumption that goes into that, the water runoff, because we had done one where we ended up like ultimately scorching the top of some bushes where we didn't have anything protecting. Yeah, so we learned a lot, and I think it's beneficial, and I think there's a place for it.
Yeah.
I just haven't found that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I hear a lot of guys kind of talk about it as like more of a lead gen thing of, hey, people are going to call you because they don't want to replace their roof.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got this option. And then ultimately, a lot of times you're going to replace the roof anyway.
Yep.
And then, the Go Nano, what I think is interesting with that is, we did the shooting it with the hail cannon, which is, kind of testing it, but not like scientific testing. Mulholland is kind of interested in doing more scientific testing with that stuff. But I think it's interesting that they use that not only on shingles, which you can do that on brand new shingles where you go, hey, we live in Dallas. We're expecting to get hail in the next couple of years. This probably will be the difference between us needing to replace our roof and not. And, you know, and so many of the SBS and all that sort of stuff sometimes will work, but if the hail's big enough, it's 2.5 inches or whatever, it doesn't matter. This, I'm, you know, feel like it raises that threshold of what would cause damage to it. But they actually use it on like concrete too. So if you have like, especially like commercial concrete where you're doing like an 8-inch pour or something and you're in an area with really bad hail, that can damage the surface of the concrete. And so they're doing like Go Nano on stuff like that.
That's pretty cool.
I wasn't even aware of that until like this last year. But I'm still kind of up in the air on most of the coatings and, you know, what place they have. And I'm sure it's somewhat market dependent.
Yeah.
Have you gotten into any of that? Seen any of that from your clients or anything?
No. We see every once in a while, you know, after major storms, you'll see these guys come rolling through with the roof wash stuff, or there was a big run a few years ago of doing elastomeric on shingles instead of like what was existing now with, I've seen plenty.
Yeah.
And, you know, the problem is that, and the carrier ends up treating it as the roof system. So it's no longer insurable from the deck up like it was. It's only insurable from the elastomeric down. I'd be curious how the carrier looks at something from the roof rejuvenation perspective, just because I'm not familiar enough with it to have a ton of knowledge. But it seems to me like if it costs somewhat comparable to my deductible, then I'll just ride it out and wait for my deductible and get my roof replaced. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I think it's a hard sell, but I think if you're using it as a funnel into other shit, then maybe. But
so what about the instance of I've got this roof and I put something like Go Nano on it, right? And then I get hit with a hailstorm that's so severe that it damages it anyway, right? It needs to be replaced because of this covered peril. Do they owe not only for that shingle replacement, but also for the application of that?
That's the argument, right?
Protectant.
That's the argument.
And I haven't really seen that play out. I don't know what the implications are there.
So, you know, obviously a couple things would have to come into play there. They'd have to let the carrier know, hey, we've done this thing. It's like putting aftermarket parts on your car, right?
Sure.
If you get in a car accident, the carrier's not paying for the wheels and tires and stuff that you put on there that wasn't from the factory if you didn't let them know. Because it changes the insurable value of what they're insuring, right? And that's something that's unique to property insurance claims, is that your policy coverage limits is comparable to the value of your home. And so, or your property, I should say. So by you doing this, did it increase the value of
not
property?
the value, but the rebuild costs.
No, I understand.
Correct.
But that's what I'm saying. It would have to increase the value for them to include it in the rebuild cost, right? So if encompassed in your $250,000 home is a $40,000 roof, right? They don't separate those necessarily where it's like, hey, this is $40,000 and but you add this coating and it makes it $45,000. You've inherently increased the value of your home by $5,000, right? The carrier is always going to work against that, and the idea of like, let's reduce our own liability. So that's why when I brought up the elastomeric, we've had carriers go, well, yeah, it damaged the elastomeric, but since they coated it, that's the roof system now. It's a separate roof system. It's like putting a second layer of shingles on your roof. It's another roof system. And I've seen them treat it that way.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that I could see is a carrier potentially turning to the warranty that comes with that product. And then, you know, I have Go Nano on my property, for example, and it has a 5-year warranty and it's supposed to help make it more hail resistant. And then, you know, a nice solid 1-inch hailstorm comes through and damages my roof covering, and then I go to file a claim. Am I potentially going to get pushback from my carrier that there's a defect in the product that I had put on there that should have prevented this from happening, you know, and just ultimately kind of create more
I haven't
headache
seen
than
that
it's
like
worth.
with like the the hail resistant shingles and all that sort of stuff. I don't see like, it's usually like, is it damaged? Yes or no?
Yep.
Like whether the expectation was that it was going to be damaged or not. I don't know. Is that relevant? I don't know if you,
I don't know that it is, but you bring up a good point though, in that me putting this roof rejuvenation thing or any other coating on top of the roof, does it void the warranty from the original roof?
I think so.
Is it insurable at that point?
Well, I don't, there's separate answers, but
Right.
I think,
No, I know.
I think it, my
To me,
understanding
if I'm the one who
is that
built-
they do void the
Yes.
warranty from the manufacturer. They're going to go, hey, it's not our problem. It's because you put this stuff on it. And then, but I think it should be insurable. I don't think it should change.
But again,
that.
it requires you telling them though too, right?
Sure.
Yep.
Like, and that's part of it, is that, that was a big push when all these companies started doing the IR shingles. Guys would go out and sell class 4, and they'd be like, if you get a class 4 roof, it reduce your insurance rate. Well, sure, if you did an NDL or if you had a full system, but just us putting these impact resistant shingles on a hodgepodge of underlayment and valley and all this other junk doesn't. So
Well, what about
There's-
the carriers that are offering to put on an impact resistant shingle, like in Texas?
Colorado was that way too.
I don't think they were going to IR though, right? They were just getting rid of
we
the
had
3-tab
we
and
had
going
one
to,
customer
Oh,
out
really?
there that the insurance company was going to pay to put an impact resistant shingle on there, and my argument on that is that their logic behind it is the fact that a 2-inch steel ball dropped at 20 feet does not cause damage to this SBS type shingle, so any hailstorm ever that comes through this area that's less than 2 inches is a manufacturing defect.
Well,
I think that's the position that you'll see.
What I saw in Colorado was Big Red was offering really steep discounts for homeowners because the roof was such a big part of their liability, right? But they were offering a really steep discount if you would do this class 4 shingle. And so we were selling class 4 shingle upgrades all day long, and the customer would pay a little bit for that. But what we discovered was when you actually look into the new policy, or that they've got massive exclusions where it's like, essentially, unless you've got holes through this shingle, they're not paying for it. And so they essentially put like a cosmetic exclusion on these, where it's like, even if unless there's water leaking through because of the hail, we're not covering this. So I really started cautioning people. Class 4 is great. It may mean that you don't need to replace your roof, but don't do it if they're going to put all these stipulations on your policy. We went all the way from roof rejuvenation to class 4 shingle exclusions. But that's awesome. I want to take a second. Taylor sent in a clip here of I think some content he found this week, and we're going to watch that together and see what we got.
This is nuts.
All right, so what's going on here?
Damn, soffit fell. Thing's fixing to collapse.
They've got whole pallets of shingles up in the middle
I think
on
like
the ridge.
five pallets.
Brilliant.
Roof loaded.
Yeah.
4 to 5.
Got some engineers over in the shingle
Just
delivery
hanging
department.
out.
I just like the music
that's-
they put behind it.
Yeah, it's
Oh
epic.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was-
The fire department's running over there.
Oh, is that who it was? I thought it was just the guys
it's the
working
fire
there.
department. Yep, where that whole freaking roof is about to collapse.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I've walked plenty of roofs where I'm like, we're not loading anything on this. Like,
Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on roof loading? Because obviously that is a shitty way.
Well,
a
under normal
terrible
circumstances,
way.
you can roof load. You just don't want to point load, right? You don't want to put too much weight on the ridge. But there's always that factor, right? It's you have no idea what's going on with decking. You don't know if trusses are damaged. You don't know some of this shit. And you get up there and you start walking around and you feel the softness, or you do whatever. By and large, you can roof load, but it's going to happen every once in a while where the ridge can't support it or whatever. But you kind of look at also the age of the house and,
right,
you know, have your guys get up in the attic and look and see if the rafters are in good shape or whatever. But unfortunately, I've seen that happen.
We know that's not going to happen.
Well, if they would follow BEI, if we would follow BEI's roof inspections,
sure,
then they would get in the attics.
Yeah. But I mean, like even just walking on the roof, like I've walked on roofs where I'm like, I'm a big guy. I'm like, this roof does not need to have any extra weight on it.
Right.
You know, we're 24 ounce centers. We're 3/8 plywood that's delaminated. Like this is a mess. Do not put anything up here. But I think, you know, part of it is you've got we got another Amber Alert. This is awesome for a podcast day.
I turned those off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's a setting you can turn Amber Alerts off.
I didn't think you could.
Yeah. Not that I don't care about kidnapped kids.
Right.
But
yeah, I'm not finding
I don't at 2 in the morning.
Right.
And I'm not going to remember the license plate as people drive by me. Like, I'm just saying.
Yeah. So where were we?
Yeah, about that roof about to collapse.
Oh, yeah. So I think one thing is like if you're in a market where you have a heavy snow load, like those roofs would have failed with a bunch of weight on it. So like in Colorado, we didn't really have to worry about that too much because, you know, you still have to distribute the weight or whatever. But like if it was going to fail, it would have failed in the windstorm or snowstorm.
It's like when that dome roof collapsed
down here in Tennessee or you're in Georgia or wherever in the South where they never have a snow load. That roof may be like ready to go.
But also a lot of these houses were built before, like specifically here in Tennessee, a lot of these houses were built before codes were enforced.
Sure.
Code enforcement wasn't a thing until
like 2012, 2016.
It was not something that was established and governed here. So there's a high likelihood that your house that was built in 1995 was just slapped together with no permitting, none of that stuff. So, you know, you're going to see that. And a lot of states are that way.
Yeah.
Like Louisiana, we saw a ton after the handful of hurricanes that I've worked down there that like, you're surprised these houses were still standing.
Yeah.
Sure.
But they were built in the 60s and 70s and there was no codes then and updated after every hurricane's gone through, and you're just surprised that they're still standing. And then houses that are new are tore down and there's no rhyme or reason to it, but you know.
Yeah, well, we had one here in Nashville that was on Belmont Boulevard, just a gorgeous house, but from the roof or from the street view, you could see that the roof had a little bow to it, and then after doing an attic inspection, it had 2x4 rafters, the OG 2x4s, but you know, the house was probably built in the 1920s or 10s, if that's the word for it. But the span was just, I mean, I bet the span was 12 to 14 feet. You know, and then they had some.
Wait, between trusses?
No, well,
from
the length of the span.
The length of the actual rafter span, and so they had put some. I guess it would be like a blocking in or something, but they didn't even have it over any sort of like load bearing wall, and so they had built something in. And at first glance, you'd be like, "All right, cool. That rafter only spans 8 feet or 7 feet," but the fact that that's not tying into anything load bearing. And so we ended up having to get engineers out because it was a liberty claim. And, you know, I was concerned with putting a dozen guys on a roof with materials just without having a professional opinion of like, are we going to be good? Because we can see this bow. I don't want, A, the customer to have to deal with that. But B, I just wanted to make sure everybody was going to be safe throughout the project.
When you look at a lot of those older, like the historically registered homes, I've worked a handful of them, and policies a lot of times don't even know what they're insuring. Like I did a Carnegie library, I got deposed on it, and it was a whole disaster, but we were having to go through and research the building methodology from the early 1900s to insure something in the late 20 teens, right? And they're like, well, what do you mean that back in the day they used to use horsehair and concrete to make the cement and whatever? You're
plaster,
like, yeah, the old hand done lath and plaster like was horsehair and other binders. Now they're obviously not doing that, but there was a value to that then. And what's the tensile strength of that and all this other junk? And
it's not cheap to get done.
We had to do all of that research to then come up with this just astronomical number for what it would take to repair it back to comparable standards. The policy wasn't prepared for that. The guy who wrote that policy was probably just pumped that he was gonna be able to put that on his books and get a bonus on it because it's never gonna get a claim, right? And then when happens, and he's like, "Oh crap, they're gonna write a massive amount of coverage to go back and recover this because it's a nationally recognized historical building." And we did a handful of them here in Nashville after the tornadoes in 2018, I think it was, and kind of the same thing where it was like no codes existed. The old school lumber from 100 years ago, it's almost petrified, but there's the gapping and the way that they fur things together, and it was a mess. I wouldn't want to be the insurer. And then the carrier would be like, "Well, that was improper means and methods." Be like, "Oh, really? From 1935?"
Right.
Show me. So.
Wow. So we're going to take a massive shift into something I wanted to talk about, which is the trend shift of carriers and policies taking policies from RCV to ACV.
Oh, yeah.
At a certain benchmark. So whether that's 10 years or 12 years, 15 years. And I've seen that more than really experienced that and done a lot with that. But what are you guys seeing from the contractor perspective, the policy PA perspective?
Well, that's where the roof payment schedule theory was born from, right? Was they couldn't go straight into ACV. They couldn't be like, "Hey, at 15 years, we're just transitioning you." Well, I mean, I guess they could, but a lot of carriers didn't. So they had this RPS where it was like, at 10 years, we're only going to pay the max this, at 15. And I get it, right? Because if I have a 3-tab shingle on my roof and my house is, the roof's 30 years old and it gets hit by a hailstorm, the hailstorm damaged it beyond its original state. However, it had exceeded its lifetime. And this goes back to one of the things we were talking about on one of the other episodes was like, at some point, it's not the carrier's responsibility to pay for these things. It's just something that you need to get done, right? Where that line is always a little bit blurry depending on who you're talking to, but I get the logic behind doing it. The discrepancy that we see in it when we're dealing with claims that have those kind of markers in them is that it's really subjective, right? So how many storms did this roof go through? So you're sitting here saying a 3-tab can go 25 years or whatever, and a 30-year can go 30 and whatever. We're putting these kind of arbitrary numbers on them. Well, a 30-year shingle in Denver is going to be completely different at 30 years than one in, Baltimore. Right. Just because of the way the weather hits, and, in Texas it's hotter. And so there's a certain amount of subjectivity there that I don't know that you can truly calculate where these things are. And then nobody's training the adjusters to determine those things other than the age, right? So they're literally looking at it going, well, it was a 30-year shingle put on 10 years ago. We're going to cut her into thirds. Yep. It's like you can't look at it that way.
Yeah.
But that's the way that they do because, again, nobody's arguing against it.
Well, and I think, there's an argument for a policy is essentially I'm paying you this amount of money for you to take this liability, right? And I still have some liability, but you're taking some liability off my hands. I think it's fair for the carriers to say, this is how that exchange is going to work, right? Like we're going to do it based on years or whatever, And so I have had customers with an RPS policy or whatever that, they a lot of times it's landlords that'll have that in my experience, but they, hey, we've had this roof for 20 years and now it needs to be replaced. We got a $2,500 deductible on a $15,000 roof and it's depreciated 2/3. Okay. You're getting $5,000 for this 15,000 or, $6,000 for this $15,000 roof. Okay, cool. Well, here's the rest of it. All the money that you saved for those years having this cut rate policy, that's what you get.
But I also think it's important to identify when you bought the policy, right? So if I'm a carrier and I extend a policy to a potential consumer whose roof's already 20 years into a 30-year lifespan, and I insure it at
that discount.
RCV, right? I don't get to then after the fact be like, well, we're going to depreciate it X without having that on the front end. Now, alternatively, if you're going to do that, that's the time to do it, is say, hey, unless you're going to change your roof out tomorrow, we're going to start you kind of at the actual cash value of where it is. That makes sense to me. Yeah. But what we're seeing is new policies being extended, somebody going out and not even being able to verify when the roof was put on. They're just going at the build date of the house a lot of times. Yeah. And they're going, oh, well, we're going to, full RCV policy. And then as soon as a claim happens, they're like, well, we're going to depreciate at this, or you have a roof payment schedule that says, a certain amount of things. Like, it doesn't allow for actual determination of the longevity of the roof itself. Yeah. And so I think it's important to note when the policy was written, because that illusionary coverage exists there too, right? Sure. But we're not seeing it that way. They're just putting the policies in place or changing people's policies by way of writing them a letter going, hey, sign this. And they don't even know what the hell they're signing a lot of times.
So that illusionary coverage, explain that.
So it's basically saying if you insured it based on its condition when the policy was bought, regardless of whether you inspected it or not, if it was damaged beyond its condition at the time of the policy buying, then you have an obligation to cover it. You don't get to go back and go, oh, well, it's 30 years of wear and tear. I've got a school in Ohio that we're working right now where the engineer came back and said, oh, well, it was from the original installation of this siding 25 years ago.
Right, we've been paying premiums on it,
and they
thought we had coverage. Yeah, with the illusion of coverage.
Yep.
And then now that we have a claim,
it doesn't.
All of a sudden, you're saying we don't have coverage.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
And that gets used a lot. That the old wear and tear argument. That's where that kind of lives, unfortunately, is that nobody knows how to argue that without saying, well, no, you insured it at the time.
Correct.
Right. And so,
when wear and tear is trickier, I feel like, because it happens gradually. Like that it was installed wrong or it was built wrong or whatever is like it was always that way and you insured it.
Yeah. But I mean, again, things deteriorate over time, right? Sure. So if I have a roof that's 20 years old when I insured it, I don't get to then penalize the homeowner for having a 20-year-old roof unless we're doing that.
That's what was expected.
Yeah, unless we do that from the beginning and say, because it's a 20-year-old roof, we're only willing to insure this to the extent that we believe that it has lifespan left.
Right, and you get consideration for that in the premiums.
Correct, but if you don't do that, you can't hit a homeowner at the time of a peril and then be like, oh, hey, we're going to reduce these things for you at that point. Like, to me, that's crap.
Yeah, well, and one thing that I see a lot, too, is where the adjuster that's on the file will misinterpret the condition with the causation.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they're going through and saying, well, it's just what we saw is just wear and tear, which is a topic for a whole nother episode to get into of condition over causation. But some of the biggest stuff I see on the RCV to ACV transition is when I first got into the industry, it never made sense to me that a homeowner could have we'll use a 3-tab shingle for example, and it's a 20-year. And so I get 25 years out of it, and a windstorm comes through and blows tabs off, and then the homeowner has a full replacement cost on that, $1,000 out-of-pocket expense for their deductible. Carrier pays the rest, and the roof has been gone for years. That it never made sense to me. If somebody's willing to pay a substantial premium for that type of coverage, I think it should be available. But I always figured that standard coverage should be maybe full replacement cost up to a certain amount of time, and then gets onto a payment schedule or something like that. And then if a customer opts into a policy that settles losses on a different schedule, a roof payment or actual cash value, to have a cheaper policy premium, then I think that's all on them. But I think it starts with the agents actually understanding the policies that they're selling to these consumers,
which a lot of times they don't,
because then they don't have a clue.
Yeah,
and
I tell you, I've talked to an agent that literally, I started asking them questions about like, hey, how do you educate your customers on like the difference between RCV coverage or ACV coverage, and they legitimately did not know what those terms meant after being an agent for like 10 years. Yeah. And it absolutely blew my mind. I didn't go on to want to work with that agent.
Right.
I believe that.
But they don't know. And a lot of times they're motivated by their their own bonus structure and things like that, because there are carriers who bonus agents by the lack of claims in their portfolio, right?
Yeah.
And so they're motivated to not necessarily fully educate their insureds, and whether that's intentional or not, right? And sometimes I don't think for most of these people it's not something that they're doing out of spite or with malicious intent or whatever, but they're just looking for their own income, right? They're reverse engineering their own dollar amount.
Well, I think the bigger incentive is they are competing on price with other insurance agents and carriers. Right?
Well, that's something too.
And so if I can sell you this cut rate policy, then my price is going to be better than theirs, and you're going to stick with me, right? Until you have a claim, right? When you find out what you actually bought. But yeah, I think a lot of them fail to do that education point. But the guys that I've met with, and I've met with hundreds of insurance agents that are really, really successful, are the ones that do take the time to explain what the different coverages are, and do take the time to build value and go, hey, I know this costs a little bit more, but here's why that's important. And yeah, some people just want the cheapest price. Those aren't great customers to have anyway. They're just going to leave you for the next cheapest price. Versus the person that goes, hey, this person's looking out for me. They know what they're doing. They're going to take care of it. But
that's also the difference between an insurance agent and an insurance broker too, right? If I'm an agent, I'm only selling one particular brand stuff. If I'm a broker, I'm going and selling.
Well, you can be an independent agent or
I'm saying just generalizing.
Yeah, but even for a captive agent, they've got multiple options within that carrier.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. But if I go into a true insurance broker who can look at Allstate and State Farm and Nationwide and Progressive and everybody, right? We see that a lot on commercial policies, right? Because most commercial policies are written out by brokers.
Sure.
And so we'll get somebody, be like, ABC Insurance out of Lexington, Kentucky. And then you start getting into it and you're like, oh, it's a Progressive policy.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But educating people on knowing 20 different types of policies is way more complex than if I were isolated down to just tiers of the same essential policy.
Well, a lot of these carriers will have like education that they provide to the agents that sell it. And so the brokers are getting the different educational pieces from 10 different carriers as opposed to drinking one flavor of Kool-Aid all the time.
Yeah. And then because where I've actually seen this real world happen is we had a customer, actually one of our neighbors probably lives a rock's throw away from us in Lenox Village, and they had an auto owner's policy. And we went out a few years ago, did an inspection on the property after a storm, peace of mind, everything looks great, 5-star review, high fives, everything's just fine. And so I had kind of let them know, hey, a lot of our clients that we run into have, full replacement cost policies with, ordinance and law coverage, and, their deductibles typically around, $1,000 to $2,500. Ultimately, here's some things that majority of our customers have in place in the event that they have any sort of loss. And so she didn't do anything with any of that information, and we had a hailstorm January 12th of 22, I believe, and about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches hailstorm went through South Nashville, and she reached out to us. We went out there, inspected the property. Sure enough, we had photos from before, photos after the storm, and we're able to confirm that, cool, plenty of hail damage from this storm. So she goes through, makes the decision to go ahead and engage the carrier on that file, and adjuster came out, and sure enough, the year prior, she went from RCV to ACV coverage. And we had our service agreement where, if the entire roof gets approved, we become the contractor to do the work. And in our particular service agreement, it says that in the event that your out-of-pocket expense is going to exceed your deductible, then we won't hold you to this contract, because I don't like that. And so we went through and, yeah, sure enough, settled on ACV. So I had asked her on more of a friend type level, like, hey, shoot me over your policies from the last couple of years. Let me at least see if anything looks out of the ordinary. And sure enough, that year prior in her renewal, she had that, and it was what I'd made that Facebook post on the other day, where it was a notice for a change in a policy, because in the state of Tennessee, they don't need any signatures. As long as they make notice a year ahead of time, they can make whatever changes they want. So that could be changing your deductible from a flat to a wind and hail percentage deductible. That can be changing your loss settlement provision from a replacement cost to an actual cash value. And that's what hers ended up doing. And, you know, she was with us, the full replacement cost in Xactimate, her deductible was around $1,000. And I think it was about another $8,000 in non-recoverable that she was going to be on the hook for. And she ended up price shopping, you know, because she was a teacher, didn't have a whole lot of money. You know, I didn't get her closed up on any financing. She was just wanting to use insurance proceeds plus a little bit of money. And I know for a fact that all the sidewall flashings were all reused, and that, you know, they just went in and slapped a shingle on, flipped an architectural over for starter, you know, and all of that. And boom, she has full replacement cost coverage again, and everything's all fair and well. But she didn't get the system that she should have.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, but, you know, I can't force anybody to go do anything. But, you know, if contractors are still telling homeowners that, you know, majority of our customers, their out-of-pocket expense doesn't exceed their deductible, or, hey, most of our customers just have $1,000 deductible, like those days are coming to an end.
Yeah.
You know, and then if I don't know that, then, and I'm telling this customer, hey, in the event the insurance company agrees to replace the entire roof, your out-of-pocket expense should only be your deductible. And then it's like $10,000.
Yeah.
You know, and if I can educate the homeowner on the front end of, you know, when's the last time you reviewed your insurance policy? Well, and just kind of leave it a little open-ended like that, because, you know, hey, your coverage may have changed.
Well, and they can't change it without your signature, right? Like that's something that
in Tennessee they can.
They're not supposed to.
Yep, they don't have to. They just have to notify you a year ahead of time in writing.
Interesting.
And actually, majority of states have moved like that. I think it's less states that actually require a physical signature now.
There's your insurance lobby at work.
Yep.
I would venture to say there's stipulations to that. Because you can't put somebody at the potential for financial risk without
their acknowledgement,
without their acknowledgement of that risk.
I know there has to be consideration, like there has to be some kind of discount that comes with that.
Yeah,
that,
which is,
you know, pullback of coverage.
Which I'm not in. You know, this leads into, like, that's why I'm not opposed to percentage-based deductibles, right? Because I would rather be offered a 1, 2, 3, 5.
Yep.
Percentage base against it to cover my stuff to the capacity that I can financially afford, than to have you tell me at 15 years we're ACV in your policy.
Right.
Right. I would rather you say, here's your options. You can pay a lot or you could pay a little. It's like your car, right? Full coverage, general liability, right? I would rather be given the option to say 1, 2, 3, 5.
Do I want full coverage or do I want
correct?
Or can I not afford it? And I would rather have a 5% deductible and
have
not
a cheaper
be
premium,
not be pushed out on an ACV thing, right? But then there's also the provision in a lot of policies where if a loss, if there's an agreed loss amount and you don't do the repairs within a certain amount of time, they're screwed. It gets they're basically saying I waive my RCV.
Yep. You
know, and so and
that time is being shortened drastically.
Well, it is. And
it used to be 1 year, then it was 180 days. I saw a policy the other day that was 60.
Wow.
From
the time they cut the initial payment.
Correct. Well,
60 days,
unless
or
there's
you
a dispute.
or
Disputed
correct,
funds.
or
Right.
you make notice that you intend on collecting your replacement cost benefits in writing. So like an email of, hey, it's friggin' snowing, we can't do the project, but we intend on collecting our additional replacement cost benefits. You know,
will they automatically give you that extension, or you're asking?
Yeah, they're
for an
required.
extension?
It's the same. It's the same set of statutes that cover the amount of like time a carrier has to respond to your solicitations for information, or, you know, if you did an SBOL, like that. The Prompt Payment Act in Texas is the one that keeps popping into my head, but each state has some version of that where it's like you have to adhere to these timelines. And if somebody requests an extension in writing for a valid reason, right, which again gets into subjectivity,
right?
Then they're required to grant that. So that's like when we see carriers, like we see it all the time, and this is why the appraisal process is so screwed up. Is like just the time frames. Like the carrier will send, I'm delayed all the day long. You don't have the financial horsepower to legal up a lot of times to go, hey, I need an extension, and they go, no.
Right.
And you, oh, what do you mean no? I thought I was allowed to get this. And they're like, yeah, we just don't want to do it.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So
yeah, that's when that policy says if you and we agree or something. You know,
oh yeah,
we have to agree as well. It's like, oh, I know how this is going to go. I know big red words their policies like that. You know?
Yeah, but they also have the horsepower, and they'll do it. Well, they will vacate appraisal awards too. You know, and it's like it's illegal. You can't, and they go, we know. All right,
take a score.
Right. Well, and because statistically, you know, I think we can all draw the assumption that some forensic accountants have done a cost-benefit analysis of, you know, what percentage are actually going to go this route, and if we decide just to act in bad faith, we'll pay the fines whenever they
you can guarantee the insurance company's done the math on whatever decision they're making.
I spoke at a carrier event 2 years ago, I think it was, and like I was confident. I got up there and I sat down, and on the stage.
You haven't been invited back, have you?
No.
Okay.
On the stage with me were, no kidding, 2 rocket scientists, like PhD level. One worked for NASA and then came to work for carriers. And I'm like, oh, I'm outgunned up here big time. And everything they were talking about was 5 years in the future. They don't care. They have an allotted dollar amount that their risk takers say, you can spend this year.
Yeah.
If you deny 80% of everything on the front end, we're going to be well into the black, right? And they know that. They're looking at weather trends on Mars 5 years from now to figure out, you know, how they want to plan out the next. These guys are like, how do we make 10 grand next week? Like their perspective on the issue is completely different.
Yeah.
And you're never going to convince them otherwise. The best thing that you can do is find an adjuster who's not tired of dealing with you.
Well, and they're,
you know,
the adjusters are the cog in that giant machine, right?
They are. And I joke with a lot of people, because again, being a disabled vet, like it all depends on who reviews your stuff. It all depends on who the adjuster is. I've had adjusters, when I met them out there, the guy goes, please don't get on the roof. I do not want to have a conversation with you. And you're like, okay, I'll stand out here in the yard and talk to the homeowner. I don't care. Right. I had one guy actually ask me to get off of a flat roof, and then his ladder fell over and he had to lean over the side of the roof and be like, hey man, you mind putting a ladder back up here? And I was like, are you sure? Because earlier you didn't want me up there. He's like, I really need your help. And then he came down and he was cool the rest of the day. But like, he was really abrasive when he first got out there, because I had the ladder set up for him and everything. I was like, this was in Iowa after the derecho. I was like,
oh yeah, that was gnarly.
Easy. And then he asked me to get off the roof, so I pulled my ladder down, and then the wind blew his ladder over, and I was like,
beautiful. Yeah, poetic.
Sucks up there for you, huh? But it is. It's all, they're so used to getting beat up by contractors all the time.
Yeah.
And you know, while I agree with, you know, you see some of these videos of these contractors posting stuff on the roof where they're arguing. While I agree with what they're intending to do, all they're doing is making the carrier adjuster go, oh, if I run across a dude like that, I'm just going to stop my inspection and go home. Because they don't have to finish it. If I'm up there just beating their butt about the repairability of a shingle or whatever, like, I don't have to stand there and take that. I'd be like, you know what, it's fine. We'll reschedule for a different day.
I mean, the thing that blows my mind is like, does that ever work? Right? Like, do you ever bully an adjuster into, they're like, I guess I'm going to approve this roof. I wasn't going to, but maybe this guy's going to beat me up. Like, that blows my mind. Like, how is that ever entered into somebody's mind? Is like, this is a good way for us to do business, as opposed to just going, hey, maybe I need to provide him evidence and documentation, or like, or be nice to him, right? Like, like whatever the thing is.
Understand? Like, this guy's not a decision maker on this, so
just like, I don't care what you do, because I'm gonna go to your manager if you don't approve it.
Gone are the days of State Farm guys sitting in their car with the check printer, and they would go, hey, I'm gonna buy this roof, and they would print you a check right there.
Right.
That does not happen anymore. 15 years ago it did. I mean, 10 years ago
I was
it
gonna
did.
say 3, 4.
I don't.
I
know when I
haven't
first
seen
got
it
into
in
it,
the
that was
last
the
2
thing.
years.
And every guy they all had their own fiduciary limit, right? Like, Johnny can write up to $15,000, and you just get a check, and then you go get your commission thing right out of the gate. And they don't do that anymore. So you're not convincing that guy, and they've put in all these layers of protection to prevent that guy from making a decision on the roof. How many times have you heard, "Well, the adjuster said he's paying for everything," and then you get a full denial?
I had a guy, same adjuster, so with a major carrier, we'll just say, but came out and like worked with him, bought the roof. It was legitimate damage, whatever. Bought the roof. It's like a week later, I run into the same adjuster again, which is in Denver. That's like rarely happens.
Oh, really?
Because I was working all over the place with different carriers and stuff. Like I wasn't running into the same adjusters very often. Running into the same adjuster, and this claim probably had more damage than the prior one. But he goes, "Oh yeah, I'm not the adjuster on this one." I was like, "Who is? Like, is he getting ready to pull up or something? Like, what's happening here?" And he's like, "Well, no, I'm just the photo taker,
Ladder
basically."
assist.
And he was a licensed adjuster, but they were using him as a documenter, and then somebody in Arizona was looking over their photos.
Yep.
And watching the video live feed or whatever, and decided to deny this claim. Yeah, and the desk adjuster sounded like, "Oh, okay, yeah, like this is making sense," until they realized that there were shingles on top of T-lock on top of wood shake with space decking and copper drip and this like 20 square roof that would have been like 50 grand, like they were like, "Oh no, that's not hail damage." Ended up they denied. I mean, it's one of the only claims that I've ever had like denied, and we didn't get approved because the homeowner was just gave up.
I've had homeowners give up. I've had property owners give up, and we always try to tell people on the front end, like, look, we can be as right as rain, but if they want to stand in concrete on it, we're not getting them to change their mind, right? And that's usually immediately followed by, and we've had claims where I was like, this is a shoe-in.
Yeah.
That ends up going to legal, and claims where we're looking at it going, I don't know, get bought immediately.
Yeah.
So it really does just depend. And then, you get into kind of circling back to the ACV, RCV thing, their hesitation to send you a certified copy of the policy. A lot of times you're working it and you're 2 or 3 months in by the time you get that policy, and then you find out it's an ACV policy, or you find out it's on a roof payment schedule. And it doesn't change the trajectory of your argument, but it does change the outcome and how you have to explain that to the homeowner or the contractor, in the case if it was a contractor that referred you.
Yeah. Well, and I've got a question for you is, so we know that policies are changing, and we know that policies can change maybe if the homeowner isn't even aware. How does the contractor, when they go out to do an inspection, how do they ask those questions to the homeowner? And then, like, how do they get that documentation to verify so that they know how that loss gets settled? Or should contractors kind of be in the dark on that? What do you feel from a PA position?
Because I live in both worlds, right? Yeah. So I am a GC in a couple of different states and a PA, right? And you're in both worlds as well. I will say it to you like this. You're selling a homeowner a roof. You're not selling them their insurance company paying for the roof, right? And I think that's where that line has gotten blurred over the years, is they want, because, again, prior to 2018, 2019, contractors could argue all of these policy related things because the UPPA laws weren't being enforced. And then they started enforcing them because contractors were getting out over their skis. The fact of the matter is, you're selling a roof. Is the roof damaged? Yes. Does it need to be replaced? Yes. Cool. Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, you need to replace this roof. Would you like to finance it, pay in cash, or would you like to see if your insurance will cover this as a covered peril? Beyond that, it should be irrelevant to you if they have an ACV policy, an RCV policy, a 1% deductible, a 5% deductible. It should not matter because you're selling the roof, right? But they get to a point where they start to realize they may lose that job because the homeowner doesn't have coverage, or they don't even know if they have coverage. And the only way it's getting bought is if it's going through an insurance claim, because let's be honest, most people don't have 30, 40, 50 grand sitting around to replace a roof on their house, right? So it's always a tough conversation to have, because especially when you have contractors who are very heavily, I don't want to call them storm chasers, but like claim insurance proceed type of contractors as opposed to retail, their livelihood depends on that. So you understand the argument and you understand the push for them to get it covered by insurance, but you're pitching that to a person who doesn't even know what their policy says all the time. So
more often than not, I would probably say.
And certain states will hold the UPPA stuff so strict that you're not even allowed to review a policy. Like you're not even supposed to look at them. The moment that you enter the policy conversation, you are subject to a fine, right? And those fines, depending on the state, range from 20 to 50, 20 to 60 grand. Like, is that $15,000, $20,000 roof worth a $50,000 fine? Probably not.
Right.
You know, but I also can't sit here and tell every contractor in the country, hey, don't touch a policy, because you know good damn well they're doing it. So
so just obviously
the fact of the matter is you're selling a roof,
right?
Period. You're not selling an insurance claim. You're not selling anything other than a roof because it needs to be replaced.
Well, and even, you know, you had said something, are you paying cash, are you financing, or, you know, getting your insurance company involved? You know, I even think that contractors should probably take it a little bit a step further and just be like, hey, you know, are you considering getting your insurance company involved to see if they'll handle or cover a portion of the cost, or potentially majority of the cost, and kind of leave it like that? Because, you know, even that's kind of where we're at now is, hey, Mr. Customer, I see pretty significant damage on your back slope. The front slope looks great. Bless you. Front slope looks pretty dang good. You know, if this were my house, I would probably have my insurance come out and look to potentially at least help on the financial side for the back, and then I'll probably finance the rest of the roof or something like that, just to get the whole assembly done at one time. But I think, and I've even tried to draw it back to where it happened or when, but homeowners have gotten so conditioned now that when I have anything going on with my roof, that it's an insurance claim and that they should pay me for my entire roof, you know? And so I don't know if it's contractors that have like made that as bad as it is, but man, it's prevalent big time. We get homeowners that
if you think it's prevalent in Nashville, like go to like Dallas. People like you pitch the proposition of someone paying for their roof there, and like it's laughable.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine.
Even Denver, people are like, I'll just wait for the next storm.
Yep.
How does the old retail model work out there in a Denver or
those companies are
Dallas?
95% insurance.
Yeah,
at least
because they can be. Because they can be.
Yeah.
And in the event, and the ones that are not are just random. They got a phone call and some guys like, hey, for my,
are they most of the time bigger companies?
That
like any retail companies, are they typically maybe like I'm a nationwide?
No,
like,
most of those
you'll have like Power that is like hard sell retail. But aside from that, like it's the chuck in a truck who might be doing retail because he doesn't know the insurance game.
Right. He's doing it
aside from that, pretty much everybody that's throwing up any kind of numbers is doing insurance work there. In markets like that.
In markets like that, for sure. And if they're not, again, it's the ones who are not are usually doing new builds. They have contracts with developers, and they have,
which is a whole other.
Yeah. And their profit margins are lower in markets like that though too, unfortunately, because they just by way of labor and things like that, guys on new builds will up their labor rate for new builds because they're not getting paid for tear off. So they're trying to up their labor rates on all the install stuff. And so you'll see smaller profit margins on new builds than you will on insurance work down there in some of those heavy storm prone states for sure. But it is, I think to what you're saying, a lot of it is contractor influence, right? And there are some phenomenal contractors in the country, but there are also some really, really poor ones, and being run by guys who have no reason to be running a business. They're great sales guys, but they shouldn't be running a business, and their model is developed off of how they would sell. And there's no cookie cutter response to that, unfortunately. And when you're in a heavily storm prone area, they're just used to you knocking the door. They know. oh, a storm hit. Damn, I'm going to have 25 roofers, and I mean, we're renters. We've never owned. And I can't tell you how many times the guys have knocked on our door and I'm like, hey, we rent. And they're like, well, can we get no, because I don't even know the owner of this house's name. I don't. It goes through this leasing agency, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, if you change your mind, it's like, I'm not changing my mind. This is not my house.
The situation is not changing. Yeah.
I'm not buying the house.
But they're so preconditioned to like, no, get the sale, get the sale, get the sale, get the sale. And so I think it becomes ingrained in a lot of the homeowners. But we argue with homeowners is just as much about, hey, this isn't covered. Like, just because you have insurance on it doesn't mean that it's damaged and should be covered by your insurance.
Yep.
So,
yeah, it's definitely interesting. It gets frustrating, and it seems like a lot of contractors almost like have the God complex of, they want to be able to carry that burden for the customer, get their whole claim approved, like do all the things, and they're not really taking into account they're putting their livelihood in danger by potentially violating public adjusting laws, unauthorized practice of law in general, and potentially like saying things to the homeowner that aren't necessarily true, or the matching argument, and then they don't realize that there's a limited matching endorsement that I can't wait for us to talk about. And just go ahead and shred the matching argument, but there's definitely a process that contractors need to go through and be educated and make sure that they're doing the best service for their clients.
I think that's the biggest issue, is that guys will have just enough information to get themselves in trouble, right? Or to be dangerous. And because sometimes the information works, right? And they win and they make a good chunk of money, it reinforces that let's keep applying this strategy, right? Because it works 1 out of 10 times.
Yep.
I'm going to keep doing this because every time it works, I make several $1,000s.
Yep.
Right? Like, keep doing it. And they're not looking at like, hey, maybe I should learn more. Maybe I should, expand out. And I'm saying there are a lot of people, like obviously BEI, we do training and we work with a lot of people that are really interested in knowing the technical stuff, knowing the ins and outs of it. But there are a lot of guys that maybe came in as a sales guy in a toxic company, and 6 months to a year or 3 later, they decided, what, this guy doesn't know how to run a business. He's making all the money.
It should be followed with, but neither do I.
But neither do I.
But,
yeah. They forget that part.
Yeah.
But this guy doesn't know how to run a business, and he's doing XYZ wrong. Like he doesn't care about the quality, and I care about the quality, right? Yeah. I mean, like, we probably all fall into the, these categories at some point in our career, but like you look at that like, hey, this guy does this thing wrong, and I think this is important. Right. And that's a valid thing to go, hey, this guy doesn't care about the quality of his construction.
Yep.
I do. I'm going to go do it better. Right. But maybe you don't understand a lot of the things that he did, or, there's other mistakes that you make. So it's not to say people shouldn't go out and start their own business and, give it a shot. But at the same time, there's so much that you can learn. There's so much that you don't know that you don't know, that you've got to, whether it's BEI or, whatever it is, you've got to learn. Otherwise, it's going to be a really expensive lesson.
But the technical side of things is the thing that people don't want to spend the time learning, right? There's the way to a fast buck. Yeah. Right. And that's,
let me learn another closing technique. Let me learn another.
The contractor environment is dominated by sales-minded people. And they're always playing the metrics. They're always playing the odds are in their favor, right? So it's like,
how do you solve this problem? More sales.
Yeah. Well, if I hire 10 sales guys, 2 of them are going to stay, and those 2 guys are going to produce $1 million apiece. I'm going to make $2 million on this group of 10 that I'm interviewing, right? Yeah. They apply that same logic to everything else that they do. And our industry is horrible about grabbing on, well, first the pay to play model. Let's start there. Then secondly, the grabbing onto these guys who have no knowledge of anything, but they had a small win and somebody heard about it. And so then they pedestal these guys. And every couple of years we go through this cycle, right? And I won't name names, but everybody listening to this will know exactly who the hell I'm talking about sometimes. But like 2-3 years ago, we listen to the financial health and welfare of your company by a certain person who didn't run a company worth of crap for the years before that, but the industry grabbed that person and took them a few years.
I don't even know who you're talking about because that could be like 10 different people.
Well,
If the shoe fits.
well, then before that we did lump sum pricing, and then before that we did blue tarp everything, right? Like it worked enough to get people's attention that they can play the statistics and go, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And then the carriers caught on, stopped paying for some of these things, the industry shift, and then it stopped working.
Right.
It's probably still working for those people who were teaching it because they were using it on a isolated basis. They, instead of learning the technical side of things, contractors a lot of times will just grab that next thing of like, how do I increase sales? That's why when we do ops consulting with people, it's like, I don't want to know how you're training your sales guys. I could care less. And they're like, yeah, but isn't it part of the process? No. The result is part of the process. I only care about the result. I don't care how you're overcoming objections at the door. I don't care how many doors you've calculated in your head that Johnny needs to knock to make $1 million this year. I don't care. And that just blows their minds because everybody pitching anybody anything in this industry is always sales this, sales, because the rest of the stuff, what you guys do at BEI, we do at Quantify, like it's boring stuff.
Sure.
You try to make it exciting and sexy somehow, but it's not, unfortunately. And it's not the thing that's making them immediate money. Right. And so they don't grab onto it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation that you heard here, take a second to subscribe to our channel so you get more notifications when we have new episodes out, but also share this with a colleague who could benefit from this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about the Building Experts Institute, check us out online at www.buildingexperts.institute. On our website, you'll find in-depth, expert-led, beautifully produced courses that will deepen your knowledge about roofing and insurance claim restoration. See you on the next episode.